Group Fitness Fundamentals Exercise Analysis Review. The Progressive Functional Training Continuum is found on pages 39 to 41 in your manual. It's actually a new concept on paper, but it's something we as fitness instructors have been doing for a long time in the Manitoba Fitness Council program. This basically helps in determining what exercises you're going to use in your class that are safe and going to promote success and be effective. So we're ranging from low skill to high skill exercises. So it's basically having your options available so that when you have a class, you could have multiple levels and all come out of the class with a good, safe, effective workout. So level 1 is isolate and educate. And it might not be realistic to have all of these levels in the class because some of them might not be necessary because your group is all intermediate or advanced. But just so you know, when you think of an exercise or a movement or a way to challenge a muscle group, you have to think from the very beginner to the person who's an athlete. So you have to kind of broaden your thinking that way. So level 1, isolating and educating. So we're talking about isolating muscles. So it's a specific single joint movement. There's practice contracting that muscle. So you actually are an active squeeze of the muscle. So you're actually focusing on it. This basically builds confidence, body awareness, and improves basic muscle functioning. So your beginners are starting to set up the neuromuscular and neurological pathways from the brain to the muscle to get the fibers engaged and working. Usually done in a supine or prone position, so laying on the back or on the stomach. And the gravity is the load. You're not adding any external resistance. It's just using body weight. And these ones are generally safe for everybody. We'll do an example of this continuum at the end. Level 2 is where you add external resistance. So basically you're adding weights, changing the lever length, so you're making things longer with the knees usually, knees to toes, and you're using elastic resistance, tubing it out down. So you're using the same exercises as you did in level 1, but you're basically creating a little bit more work. So it's easier to maintain proper form because you're not actually asking them to balance or stabilize because they're laying on the floor. Level 3, functional training positions. So now we're talking about reducing the base of support and moving to a seated or a standing position. And this increases stabilizer challenge where people have to actually engage their core to actually keep their posture, not relying on laying on the floor to support their spine. Level 4, you're combining increased function with resistance. So now you're adding the appropriate amount of external resistance to challenge the stabilizers. So rather than going light for learning, you're now into heavier for working. So you're choosing a load where they're feeling challenged in the last couple of repetitions. Level 5 is you're working multiple muscle groups with increased resistance and core challenge. So now we're doing combination moves. So we're adding a squat with a bicep curl, for example, where resistance, balance, coordination, and core stability are taken to a higher level. So you progress the exercise from that. And finally, level 6, you're adding balance, speed, and rotational movements. So standing on one leg, on a stability ball, adding plyometrics or jumping, rotation with lifting, a life or a sports skill. So it's risk for injury increases, but as long as people are able to execute the previous levels safely and they are able to maintain their core position and maintain perfect form, then level 6, the risk of injury goes down as long as you're performing it correctly. So taking a beginner and putting them into level 6 exercises right away is not safe because they haven't got maybe the neuromuscular pathway going. They are not able to keep their coordination in check. They are not able to keep their stabilizers engaged. So that's why we need to have different levels with our options with our classes. So let's do just an example here of the worksheet. So this worksheet's in your package. And here's all the levels. So level 1 example would be supine chest press with no tubing. So laying on their backs and basically just going through the motions of how to do a chest press. From there, level 2 is where we would add some light tubing. All right, so there's a little bit of resistance. They're getting used to that movement, now pushing against the light load. Level 3, they change from laying on the floor to a standing chest press with tubing. So they're upright, engaging their core stabilizers, still light tubing because they're still learning because they have to engage the core a different way. Level 4, the same standing chest press, but now with heavier, more appropriate tubing. So now their chest stabilizers can work. They can keep their core position strong. And now they can execute the movement with more force. Level 5 would be adding the chest press with a step back lunge with heavier tubing. So this would be where they're standing upright and then they press forward, step back lunge, and they're actually using arms and legs together. And finally, we'll be adding a balance piece to that where we're doing a standing chest press with a step back lunge, and the legs come back together, the knee up comes up for a balance challenge. So on your DVD, you actually have a couple of examples of the progressive functional continuum that you can observe, referenced on page 41. And then also on your DVD, there is a muscular conditioning progression that's also appropriate from page 102. So those are two other examples that you can watch with your DVD. Next concept is muscle balance, and that's found on pages 34 to 37. And when you think about whatever type of class you're teaching, you have to think about what muscles are being used over and over and over in the class. So we need to think about, take a step back and say, okay, what is used every day and what can I do in my class to balance that out, as opposed to focusing on muscles that are already super tight, already super strong. So how can I use my time with my class to balance out their bodies? So by incorporating opposing moves, this is a simple way to fix potential problems in people's postures. So stretching the tight muscles and strengthening the weak. So we look at upper body versus lower body. If you just do an entire class that focuses on lower body cardio, then maybe you include upper body strength with that. Posture. Usually it's the chest is tight, the back is weak. The hip flexors are tight, the hamstrings are weak. So what can you do in your class to not exacerbate the problem, but maybe fix it? Maybe you do less chest exercises and more back exercises. Maybe you do more chest stretching and less back stretching. So we're thinking about how the body is overused and try to figure out ways to compensate for that. Differences between right and left. We all have a dominant side. So maybe rather than doing equal number of rotational movements to the right and to the left, people have to figure out what way do you swing a golf club. Do one set to that side and two sets to the other to balance it out. And finally, the front and the back of the body. Usually the things in the front tend to be a little bit stronger and the things in the back tend to be a little bit weaker. How can you modify your class to make up for that discrepancy? So you have to think outside the box a little bit, make sure you're focusing on posture and trying to make sure you're not making things more problematic. So there's an example on your DVD to watch, reference on page 38, opposing muscle groups for balance. So it gives you some ideas with that. So posture is a huge part of what we do, and it's something I think that we need to focus on in every movement, in every class, in every exercise to get people to know what it is and be able to execute it properly. So here's some examples of what you might see for posture. A sway back where the hips are forward, a lordotic curve where there's a big arch in the back, a thoracic curve so you get the big hunch here in the back and see the chin juts out a little bit. The forward head, which is a huge piece, things happening now in our culture with computers and screen time where our necks are forward. And this is where we want the ideal posture. So ear over shoulder, shoulders over hips, hips over knees, knees over toes. Nice straight line, chest is lifted, chin is back, knees, hips, toes are all pointing forward. This is where we want to get people to be So all of your setup exercises, all of your starting positions should start with good posture, be it for strength, endurance, cardio, or flexibility. So here is a little summary of what you should be cueing or looking for. All right, which we talked about. The hands should be relaxed and the palms in or slightly forward. Think about shoulder blades down and together, and that will help open up the chest and lift it up. Abdominals pulled in, so a slight little pelvic tilt, it's like you're doing up a tight pair of pants. Not a huge tilt, but just a little bit just to engage the core. Pelvis should be neutral, so it shouldn't be tipped forward or tipped back. It's basically like a bucket holding some water. Knees are soft and slightly bent. We never lock a joint, even in standing in good posture. Keep the knees soft. Feet are shoulder width apart, and the body weight is evenly distributed between the front and back of the feet. It is so important that we teach people what good posture looks and feels like, and that they need to maintain it in every movement that they do. So when you're cueing posture and alignment, your alignment cues focus on the spine, including the neck and the chin, pelvis, shoulder blades, the shoulders themselves, the shoulders rolled back, chest open, wrists, elbows, hips, knees, and ankles. So whenever you're cueing alignment for any movement, those are the joints that you want to focus on. And when you're giving cues for posture, do them before you do the movement. So set them up in perfect posture and then cue the movement. So set up first and then move. So muscles of the core include your rectus abdominis, the one that you see, your internal and external obliques, which are laid on the side, and then your transverse abdominis, which is the one that's deep underneath everything closest to the internal organs. That's the girdle of the body. Those three abdominal muscles plus your erector spinae, the ones run along the back of the spine, make up your core. So those are the ones we want to focus on specifically for posture, as well as focusing on for all movement to make sure that they're working the best to protect our very, very injury-prone spine, to make sure we're giving our lower backs and our upper backs the best possible chance to stay strong and not be injured. So core stabilization has two purposes. One is core training is aesthetic. So those are the bodybuilders, the people that want to get the washboard abs, the six-pack. They want to see the muscles popping out. How you get that is different than maybe what you get for functional training. So people that are wanting the aesthetics are going to do a lot of crunches, a lot of flexion, a lot of moving the chest towards the hips. In real life, we don't use our core that way. We don't walk around and flex our ribs closer to our hips and hunch forward. In real life, they're functional to keep our posture nice and tall and to keep our lower back and nice and neutral. So there's a difference in training, a difference in focus. And when we're focusing on functional training, we're talking about whole body training that challenges the torso. So every move that we do, the core is engaged in working. Using unstable surfaces, so challenging ourselves with balance. And this results in a strong and coordinated core with a high endurance capacity. We want our core muscles to work all day long to keep our lower back in check. We also can generate more power with a strong core, improved function for everyday activities, and will also provide new and varied workouts. So the functional training movements are more the isometric type of movements, the things where you're holding and stabilizing something, front plank, side plank, a V-sit, those types of exercises, because then they're teaching the core how to protect the spine in a loaded and functional way, as opposed to doing thousands of crunches, because you only need to be able to do one crunch a day to get out of bed. We don't walk around doing crunches in real life when we're standing up. So finding neutral spine, here's a little video that we are going to watch that explains neutral spine for you.
And today we're going to be studying an advanced problem with that neutral spine. And we did start off and that process in our form classes. and that's sometimes affects a little bit of confusion. So what we're going to do is we're going to get Sunny to implement a neutral spine for you. Next, you're going to learn during classes how you should be defining a neutral spine. Okay. So a neutral spine is basically the relationship of the pelvis, the lower back, and also the back of the big skin. It helps to make sure the spine is in the correct position. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to get Sunny just to gently tilt the pelvis back towards her. Okay? And if you're looking to the lower back area here, you find that Sunny's lower back is lengthened down to the floor. Okay? Now, when we tilt Sunny's pelvis in the opposite direction, okay, you notice that is now some more space underneath the lower back. Okay? So just tilt back and forth just a few times. Okay? This is really nice because it helps to build the relationship between the pelvis and the lower back. It gives us that awareness so that when we move into other exercises, we're able to control or manage that neutral spine. So just start to decrease those building so you finish right at the middle point. Okay? Time here. So that you find the two bony points at the front foot and the pubic bone is roughly parallel to the floor. This is just a gentle curve you can walk. Okay, so you should feel it lengthen the spine. So it's just the tail bone is pitching this way and the front of the head is pitching that way. Now in this neutral position, this is the optimal position for our core muscles to actually stabilize the spine in this particular position.
So that gives you a good example, visual of how to find neutral spine. And the following points basically describes what the gentleman just did in the video. The only thing that's an additional point, which I find to be helpful, is have people, when they're laying on their back, put their fingertips between their ribs and their hips on the flesh. Get them to cough, and they're going to feel their abdominals kind of push out against. Then when you cough or sneeze, that is your transverse abdominis engaging. So that's the muscle they want to think about when they're getting into their neutral position. So the next step basically follows through where you do the squish the donut, you drop the back and then arch the back. So exactly what was shown in the video. And then finding a happy medium between the two. This is the neutral spine position. And the only other thing I would add to his explanation is just relax the stomach muscles in this position. Make sure you breathe. And then you think about scooping the lower abdomen inwards, like if you're zipping up a pair of pants. This is a little slight move in the core to turn on the abdominals to stabilize that position. That is your neutral spine. So every exercise, every movement, we need to get people to be in this to protect their lower back. So when we are creating our classes and picking exercises, you need to ask yourself some basic questions about every movement. Is the activity safe for all joints? And we are looking specifically at the spine, the knee, and the shoulder. So when you're picking movements, are you compromising the spine in any way? Rotational torquing forces? Is the knee going beyond the toe? Is alignment an issue? Is the shoulder getting pinched or pushed forward? So you think about the shoulder and the basics of how the bones are put together, how the ligaments support that, and how the muscles provide movement. And using your best knowledge, is that compromising any of those structures with the exercise you're choosing? Is the activity or movement effective? Is it giving you the desired outcome or intention? That specificity principle that we talked about with training principles. Are you compromising safety for variety? Sometimes a bicep curl is the most boring exercise in the universe. There's not much you can do in elbow flexion. You can vary up the foot position, the stability, but if you start doing some crazy things which put people at risk for injury, then maybe you need to take it back to the basics. And is the exercise functional? How does this movement relate or imitate or enhance activities of daily living? So how is a hamstring stretch important for activities of daily living? Well, it allows people to tie their own shoes, right? Pick stuff up off the floor, keep their lower back in check. Also ask yourself, does the activity reduce risk of injury and prevent a decline in function? So doing squats definitely are something that we need to do to enhance movement of all life activities and prevent function. Most of us want to be able to go to the bathroom by ourselves when we're 80, 85, 90. So practicing squats now until then will help us be able to sit on the toilet without having help. So something that like that is real for people. And looking at the muscle group and what does it normally do? Is it conduct strength or endurance activities? Is it a stabilizer or a mover? And is this the best bang for my buck? For the amount of time I'm going to spend in my class or with this movement, am I getting the most out of it? So yes, you could do shoulder press by itself over top of your head, but maybe incorporating a squat with it might make more sense. How do I use my abdominal muscles? Is it a mover or a stabilizer? Well, generally the core muscles need to be a stabilizer, so looking at using a front plank instead of a forward crunch would be more appropriate. So you have to ask yourself questions about every movement and figure out what's going to be the best choice for your class. So just a quick review of muscle movement terms from page 30. Your agonist is your prime mover, or the boss, the one that's in charge of the movement, so it's the muscle that causes the movement. Your antagonist is the muscle that is in opposition. So if my agonist is my biceps brachii, my antagonist would be my triceps brachii. My biceps brachii causes elbow flexion. My triceps brachii causes elbow extension. An assister will help the agonist, and the stabilizer will keep joints from moving, and they are an isometric contractor, so they actually keep you in position. Our courses at this level don't focus on assisters or stabilizers, so you're more looking at which is the agonist and which is the antagonist. Movement terms review from page 29. So isometric, iso means same, metric means length. So there's tension in the muscle but no change in length. So these are movements where you're holding a position like a front plank, like a V-sit, like you're carrying a TV where you're not curling it up and down, you're holding it one position, isometric. That's something we use in fitness classes quite a lot. Isotonic, iso is same, tonic is tension, so there's tension and movement with isotonic contractions, and we have two phases. You have the concentric and the eccentric. The concentric phase is the shortening of the muscle where the muscle is contracting and the load moves against gravity. The load could be the weight of the hand or the body. It can be something you are holding on to, a dumbbell or a bar or a plate. Or it could be the weight stack in a cable machine. So if you're using the cable machines in the gym, then when the weight stack, which you put the pin in, goes up, that means the load is working against gravity. That is the concentric phase. The eccentric phase is the lengthening phase. So this is where the muscle lengthens under resistance, under tension, and the load moves with gravity. So it's like the brakes of the body. It slows you down so you don't fall down or drop something. The concentric phase is usually the one people work the hardest at. You see a lot of people that lift weights there, work really hard, slow, grunting, lifting, and then they just let the weight fall, the eccentric phase. I would challenge them to actually work harder in the eccentric phase because that's where most of the change, where you get more higher percentage of change in that phase. It's the stronger of the two contractions, and working slowly and controlling that phase will actually lead to significant strength gains. So concentric, load moves against gravity, so up, and eccentric is load moved with gravity or down. Isokinetic, iso means same, kinetic is speed. So now this is the hydraulic equipment like at Curves or other companies like that. Or water, aquatic classes is actually hydraulics. And the harder you push against the machine, the harder the machine pushes back. In isokinetic equipment and hydraulics, there's no eccentric phase. It's push for the chest, pull for the back. It switches from agonist to agonist. There's no eccentric contraction. It's concentric push, concentric pull. So isokinetic is an option. I think it's a good choice, but not something you do forever because you do need to be able to work your body in that eccentric loading, lengthening phase. So the next thing is how you can look at all your exercises and movements and determine what's happening, what muscle's in charge, what is the agonist, and what action is being happened, so that you can decide if it's if what your exercises you're going to choose is going to fit the plan that you have for making sure the body is balanced. So when you're using this, you think you're using JAM, joint, action, muscle. So we look at the concentric phase. As exercise physiologists, kinesiologists, fitness professionals, we have decided that the concentric phase is the one that we focus on. That's the one that determines what muscle is in charge. The eccentric phase happens, but we don't focus on it very much. It's kind of just along for the ride. So when we focus on that concentric phase, we look at the joint. And the joint is the same in both the concentric and eccentric phase. There's no difference. If it's the elbow working or moving, it's the elbow working on the way up and the elbow working on the way down. The action, this is where the difference is. We look in the concentric phase to determine when is the load moving against gravity. That's the one you want to focus on. Eccentric phase, we don't really care. It happens, but just realize that it's the opposite of the concentric phase, but it doesn't matter, okay? Finally, the muscle, and the muscle is the same in the up phase, the concentric phase, and the down phase, eccentric phase. So if it is my bicep in a bicep curl, the joint would be elbow. The action would be on the way up, elbow flexion, joint angle gets smaller. Eccentric phase, elbow extension, joint angle gets bigger, but who cares? We focus on elbow flexion. What muscle causes elbow flexion? Biceps brachii and brachialis, depending on hand position, right? So, and it's the same, it's biceps brachii and brachialis in the eccentric phase, but it's the biceps lowering or lengthening under tension, as opposed to the triceps causing elbow flexion. We don't just switch to the opposing muscle group and the triceps pull the arm back down. It is the biceps lowering or lengthening back to start. So here's a little summary of all that. The only thing we didn't talk about was with tubing. So in tubing, the concentric phase happens when the tubing lengthens, and then the eccentric phase is when the tubing shortens or returns to start. It's that snapback that you have to control. That's the eccentric phase. So this basically explains the process that we just went through. So let's do another example. So here is an exercise. So we look what joint is moving. So it's in here and here. So it is the elbow joint working in both phases, and this exercise is called the skull crusher, right? Because the bar is coming down towards the skull. So it's the elbow in the concentric, right, on the way up, and eccentric on the way down. In the concentric phase, when it comes up, it's elbow extension. On the eccentric phase, it's elbow flexion, but who cares? What muscle or muscles cause elbow extension? The triceps cause elbow extension, and the triceps are actually working to lower it down. So it's triceps concentric on the way up, triceps lengthening on the way down. Is this exercise safe as depicted? Yeah, it's pretty safe. It's also very effective, an exercise you'll use quite a lot. Alternatives, if someone can't lay on the floor on their back, there are people that can't get down and up on the floor, so you need to have options for them. Maybe a French press where you're sitting up and pressing the weight overhead, a kickback where you're standing with your elbow back and you're extending the weight behind you, or you have your hands close together on the stomach and doing narrow push-ups. Lots of options for that. To make things harder, you can add more weight. So right now she just has the bars. You can put plates on the end. She could have her back on a BOSU or be on a stability ball, or she could lift her hips up into a bridge so she actually has her core engaged a little bit differently and using her legs. So a few options there to make things harder as well. So every exercise that you have or pick or look at or are going to try to use in your class, do this to figure out what muscle is in charge and what's working, what's happening in the concentric phase, so that when you put your movements together, you don't have all elbow extenders all together, so that you're not having to the point where people just can't complete it because their arms are too tired, their triceps are too tired. So you can use it to mix and match movements, and also so you can say, well, this is muscle that tends to be weaker compared to the bicep, so I'm going to focus on it more. So you can use it when you're putting your movements together to make sure that you're creating a balanced and safe, effective routine. There are other examples that you can do. You can walk through that sheet on your own. In your package, you have another sample here, right, where you can put any exercise you want into this piece and then go through the jam and figure out if you're going to use that exercise or not. After a while, you don't need to write it down. It just becomes second nature, but it is something that you can go through and do. If you need more practice about muscle balance and you want a good anatomy review, there's a worksheet in your package that basically walks you through all the major muscle groups of the body and where you can identify the joint and the action, right? So it's using that jam principle, but it's giving you the actual muscle and determining if you need to stretch or strengthen it to improve posture. And there is an answer key included with that. So that's something that you can work through as well to practice your exercise analysis. And also, there's also a muscle pairs sheet to figure out which muscles go together. And it's based on joint action, generally, as opposed to location. So there is an answer key with that as well that you can work through. So another piece of the puzzle to practice to get the anatomy into your brain.